It's okay to be scared. Madeline. Just to give a brief background for those who haven't played Celeste. Celeste is a platformer-style game that focuses on Madeline's struggles. Madeline is the main character in Celeste, and she is at a tough point in her life, so she decides to leave everything behind to climb the mountain. Along the way, she meets a memorable cast of side characters who interact with her on her journey. Theo is a traveler who's not quite sure what to do with his life, but he's an avid social media user. Mr. Oshiro, a ghost, was once the caretaker of a pristine hotel until one day he sadly died. The final character that's worth mentioning is the Hag, but we'll talk about her later. So now that we have the basic premise laid out, let's analyze Celeste to see what makes this game an absolute masterpiece. The three things that make Celeste stand out are its beautiful analysis of mental health, the music, and the gameplay which helps shape the narrative. So let's jump in. Mental health. Celeste isn't just a game in my opinion. It's a beautiful representation of the struggles everyday individuals have. Mental health is at the forefront of this game, and all of the different elements of Celeste work in perfect unison to dissect it. So let's talk about what the mountain represents. The mountain, in my opinion, is the mental health struggle that each character has in the game. The mountain is talked about as a physical location, but when you see how the characters interact throughout the story, it becomes clear that the mountain is whatever mental health challenge each character faces. As characters attempt to climb the mountain, their worst fears and insecurities are realized. So let's start out with our first character analysis. Theo meets Madeline for the first time at a bonfire. You find out that Theo is trying to climb the mountain, but he's never made it to the top before. He still has some unresolved issues that he's working through. Even though Theo seems self-assured and confident, the more we learn about his character, the more we can see he's emotionally fragile as well. Theo still mourns the loss of his grandfather, but this is only one element of his character. Theo is obsessed with his social media accounts. He's constantly posting selfies to share his memories with the world. Unfortunately, this also has the effect of making him feel self-conscious about his life. He constantly feels like he is being watched and that all of his actions are being spectated and scrutinized. We can see his need for validation come out when Madeline first reaches the Mirror Temple. Theo is caught inside of a prism and he talks to Madeline. At first, it seems like the things in the Mirror Temple are only manifestations of Madeline's depression and anxiety. However, Theo explains that the floating eyes in the temple are because he feels like all eyes are on him. He seems to have some level of social anxiety because of his interactions with social media. He feels like everyone is constantly looking at him and analyzing his every move. So, Theo's mountain could be thought of as social anxiety, or possibly that he doesn't feel like he lives up to everyone's expectations. Even though Theo is overwhelmed, he still manages to not be a stagnant character. Despite the mountain in his way, Theo tries to push forward and climb his own mountain, while helping Madeline climb hers as well. Theo constantly imparts wisdom onto Madeline, and this can be thought of as a microcosm of mental health support. Now that we have a better understanding of Theo and his struggles, let's talk about another important character, Mr. Oshiro. Mr. Oshiro is a minor side character that actually has a lot more going on than meets the eye. Mr. Oshiro was the manager of the hotel in Celeste until he was forced to close the hotel and he inevitably died. His spirit still resides in the hotel because it is Mr. Oshiro's pride and joy. This once pristine hotel he managed is now in shambles. The hotel rooms are littered with various items, and the hotel is grungy and cluttered throughout. The hotel is a physical representation of his current mental health state. Mr. Oshiro tries every tactic he can to keep Madeline from leaving the hotel when she stops in on her journey. He wants her to enjoy the hotel as much as he once did. Oshiro seems very self-conscious about the state of his hotel, and seems overwhelmed in general. He is rude to Madeline because he is lashing out based on his own insecurities. Madeline, being the caring character that she is, eventually helps Oshiro clean up his entire hotel. Oshiro seems to have hoarder tendencies given the state of his hotel. The thing Oshiro loved the most in the world ended up being his source of suffering. People with hoarding tendencies often feel guilty and ashamed of their living conditions, and we can see this with Oshiro's character as well. His unwillingness to admit that his hotel is in shambles shows just how much it hurts him. The hotel is clean now because of Madeline, but Oshiro still seems sad. This message in the game is very poignant because it serves as a good life lesson on top of being character development for Madeline. As much as we want to help those suffering in our lives, ultimately, the only one who can change their life is the person struggling. In this way, we get an almost out-of-game realization about the difficulties associated with mental health. Oshiro seems depressed, and when Madeline pushes him on the thing he loves most, he inevitably snaps and goes on a rage-induced tirade. This anger and rage shows how much resentment he harbors because of the state of his legacy. But after he simmers down, he eventually retreats back to his hotel, because it's also his only source of comfort and happiness. Oshiro can't part with his hotel, because in his mind, the hotel is a part of him, and leaving that behind would feel like he's killing a part of himself. Oshiro is an important character in Celeste, because he helps Madeline's character develop. He also shows the player how destructive mental health issues can be, without the proper support. It can be cumbersome to cope with any issue, without some sort of an emotional support system. Madeline's interactions with Oshiro genuinely change his perspective, and allow him to make friends at the end of the game. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, the proverbial creme de la creme, Madeline. Madeline feels stuck in her life. She's been so normalized to her depression and anxiety that she's been living with it for years. Madeline felt like she needed to get away from it all, so she decided to climb the mountain. In the beginning, she's having a relatively straightforward time, until her mental health takes physical form. This version of Madeline looks very goth and her eyes look somber. This is to illustrate to the player that this is Madeline's negative view of herself. Let's just call her Gothaline. Gothaline is meant to represent all of the negative feelings that Madeline has about herself. Whenever Madeline is feeling good about herself, Gothaline has to come in and ruin her day. At first, Madeline is miserable, until she interacts with Theo and learns how to cope with Gothaline constantly trying to tear her down. Madeline felt very scared until Theo helped her boost her confidence. The beautiful thing about this game is that it really makes you appreciate the resources that you have. Also, as a little side tangent, Theo and Madeline's relationship is my favorite thing about the game, and it's just too damn sugoi. Madeline's confidence begins to grow through interacting with Theo. We can see that she has some self-confidence built up when she helps Mr. Oshiro clean his hotel. She wants to give in to Gothaline and give up, but the confidence she's built up helps her keep moving along. But when Mr. Oshiro lashes out at Madeline, based on his own insecurities, Gothaline comes out against Madeline's will. She is very harsh to Oshiro even though she didn't want to be. This is a very telling symptom of depression. Madeline's anxiety and depression are so great that Gothaline has free reign to do whatever she wants. This allows her to be mean to Mr. Oshiro even though Madeline disapproves. After she leaves the hotel, she meets Theo again. Her internal turmoil and stress around the climb is so much that it causes her to have a panic attack. Luckily, Theo is there to help her focus her breathing. This is a common technique in cognitive behavioral therapy that allows the mind to refocus instead of fixating on the Gothalines inside of all of us. Theo tells Madeline to focus on a feather floating through the air, to have her mind focus somewhere else. Eventually, Madeline's mental health reaches a breaking point and she is thrown down into the abyss. Oftentimes, mental health can get drastically worse before it gets better, because the brain is trying to hold on to what it's been accustomed to. After Madeline has her interaction with Gothaline on the gondola, she falls down even though she's practiced her breathing. Her internal thoughts got the best of her and caused her to break down the confidence she's built up. Madeline loses confidence in herself completely and begins to doubt herself. She questions why she began trying to combat her mental health issues at all, but eventually she tries a new approach. Madeline never really considered that Gothaline was hurting too. So instead of trying to fight Gothaline, she tries to embrace her. Gothaline fights as hard as she can to tear Madeline down and distance herself from her. Eventually, Madeline gets through to Gothaline. Or to think of it a different way, she tries to understand why she has depression and anxiety. She realizes that the negative internal thoughts she's been having also serve a purpose in her life. Gothaline isn't evil, rather, She tries to help Madeline through tough times and protect her from being hurt. Gotheline wasn't trying to hurt Madeline, she was trying to protect Madeline by using anxiety and depression. You can see this when she talks about how Mr. Oshiro is trying to take advantage of her. Her internal negative thoughts or depression tried to tear her down to make her realize she was being too trusting. Madeline does care about Mr. Oshiro, even though he was mean to her. Once Madeline and Gotheline combine, the rest of the game focuses on them creating a stronger bond. This is one element of the narrative I found to be truly moving, because depression and anxiety are usually thought of with a negative connotation, but they are a part of us. Instead of trying to get rid of our anxieties or depressive feelings, it can be more fruitful to harness those feelings and turn them into something magical. This to me is the most poignant scene of the game, where she accepts her issues instead of fighting them. Once Madeline reaches the peak of the mountain, she is resolved emotionally. Tears were streaming down my eyes at this point, which I think is a common experience when playing this game. I think that Madeline is a very relatable character to anyone who's struggled with mental health issues. But if we can learn to harness our inner Gothelines, we can achieve more than we might believe. The last character to break down in this game is the old hag, and oh boy do I love her. She is the troll of the game, but not really. The hag is an interesting character who continually reappears in this game. She's basically Celeste's version of Jiminy Cricket. The old hag is portrayed as crazy, but in reality, she has already beaten her mental health struggles and is actually the most mentally sound out of all of the characters. Her character serves as insight into Madeline's problems, and as a guide to help her in the right direction. She can even be thought of as a therapist to some extent. She has successfully climbed the mountain, and through her experience, she helps Madeline who is suffering. Being intentionally vague is also purposeful, because Madeline has to experience her issues for herself and not be told what to do. In this way, the hag serves as a perfect mental health guide. Now that we have broken down all of the major characters, I want to talk about how the music in Celeste perfectly encapsulates Madeline's current mental state. Music. Before we start the music analysis, I'd like to give a massive shout out to Lena Raine. You're a wizard, Lena! The first song we hear when playing the game is called First Steps. First Steps has a very upbeat and tranquil sound to it. The high notes really fill you with a sense of joy and wonder. This is how Madeline feels at the start of her journey. She is tentative but optimistic in her battle with mental health. She hasn't had to interact with Gotheline at all, so her mind is seemingly confident at this point. Then we transition into Resurrections. This song is almost in stark contrast with the first theme. The melody seems dark and menacing, almost ominous. This is the first time that Madeline interacts with Gotheline, and we can see that it is a struggle for her. Whereas First Steps fills us with hope and happiness, this song gives us a sense of unease of what is yet to come. Towards the middle of the song, we can hear some of the notes of First Steps, but in this rendition, the notes feel more drawn out and hollow, showcasing how severe Madeline's anxiety and depression is. Once Madeline arrives in the hotel, we hear the piece Scattered and Lost. The notes are all over the place to give the player a sense of unease and anxiety. Not only this, but it's also extremely clever how the haunting whistle sounds are integrated. The notes remind us that we are in a haunted hotel, and the music sets the scene for the hotel perfectly. As the song continues, it gets progressively more anxious sounding, and that's because Madeline feels overwhelmed by the work and is fearful of what is to come next. The drums give the player a constant sense of urgency to make us feel like something bad could happen at any given moment. The way that the song progresses from a slow rhythmic song to something much more intense kind of reminds me of a heart that is beating faster. Anyone who's had anxiety knows that when you feel anxious, your heart starts to beat really fast. This is a masterful way to set the scene and tell something more with the soundtrack. After the hotel, Madeline has an anxiety attack because of her internal turmoil and all of the traumatic things that just happened to her. This is where the piece Anxiety comes in. Listening to Anxiety, you can't help but feel a little bit anxious. From the slow buildup of the piano to the sporadic transition of synthesized notes, you can experience how intense Madeline's anxiety is. The louder the synths get and the lower the notes go illustrates Madeline's fall into darkness. Once Madeline enters the mirror temple, the music becomes very dark and sinister. In the Mirror feels like a bleak and hopeless song because it's the point where Madeline is coming to terms with her own mental health. The dark synth notes give a feeling of hopelessness and being alone with one's mental health. One of the best components of the song that really sets the mood is the whispering that can be heard if you listen carefully. It gives a sense of Madeline's worst thoughts physically taking shape. The louder and more intense the music becomes, the more we hear the whispers in the background. This is one of the lowest moments in terms of Madeline's mental health, and this song illustrates this beautifully. We actually feel like we are getting inside of Madeline's head. After the darkness comes the light, or in this case, a bonfire. The song Madeline and Theo has a very pleasant sound to it contrasted to the earlier songs. This is because Madeline trusts Theo and has a good relationship with him. The guitar is very peaceful and tranquil, as if the song is trying to convey to us that this is what Madeline feels like when she's happy and safe. The uplifting melody conveys a sense of trust and warmth towards Theo. The next song, Confronting Myself, is the obvious tipping point in the plot. Everything in Madeline's journey so far has led up to this interaction she has with her mental health. This song is all over the place, and understandably so. Madeline is having a mix of emotions as she confronts the darkest components of her life. But Madeline is also very excited to confront herself. The song has a very uplifting beat mixed with distorted choir sounds. This conveys to the player that even though Madeline has fully committed to confronting herself, she still has some reservations about the entire engagement. This song is really intense too, fast-paced, showing how much of a struggle it is to get down to the bottom of our sadness and anxieties. After Madeline finally breaks through to Gothline, we get to hear the song, Little Goth. This is essentially another reworking of the main theme of Celeste, but even more somber. Madeline is struggling emotionally, almost on the brink of defeat, but Gothline comes around and decides to open up. The piano notes make you feel what Gothline is feeling. Hearing the song, we begin to understand the pain that Gothline has been internalizing, and how much this journey has hurt her. The notes in this song feel even more somber than the rest, if that's even possible. Right as we think we know where the song is headed, it takes a complete 180 and starts to sound more uplifting. Gothline is realizing how much harm she's inflicted, and Madeline is starting to break through to her depression and anxiety. Gothline realizes how much she's hurt Madeline, and in a way, this song sounds almost apologetic. The last song on our list is Reach for the Summit. Reach for the Summit fills our hearts with joy and wonder. This song is trying to convey how much different life feels when we are mentally healthy and inspired. Instead of the synths usually conveying sad notes, the synths in this song are used as a background uplifting melody. The last song is also a masterpiece because it also encapsulates the trials that Madeline has overcome thus far. You can hear ghostly notes to show how she's overcame the hotel. Darker notes are also thrown in to show her struggles with depression and the trials that she's faced. The main melody is back again and in full force. But this is probably the happiest rendition of the melody. Madeline is no longer fearful of Gothline, but confident that if they work together, they can achieve more than even they think. The end of the song is amazing as well, because the music eventually fades into nothingness. I view this as Madeline coming to terms with her issues and having mental clarity. The quiet we hear is letting us know that Madeline is finally at peace. Anxiety can be very loud and consume all of our thoughts, but having a reprieve from them would probably sound like a build-up to nothingness. Now that we've broken down the characters and went over how the music perfectly encapsulates Madeline's mental health, let's take a look at how the gameplay brings the entire package together to make Celeste more than a game. Gameplay. Let's just get this out of the way. Celeste is hard as hell. Anyone who has ever beaten this game knows how difficult the game can be at certain times. I believe the difficulty in Celeste helps to embody the absurd difficulty that can come with mental health struggles. The game gets progressively harder, and this is intentful. At first, the game slowly teaches you the mechanics and walks you through the gist of the game, but as we soon find out, we've been goddamn lied to. Oh, isn't this jump easy? What do you mean Gothline has death beams and laser bullets? Why is this wind so strong? What the hell are these floating head platforms? The game has a progressively ruthless difficulty spike. This is because mental health is the same way. At first, we are confident that things will be easy, but when we get down to the root of our problems, we can find out that changing who we are can be soul-crushingly difficult. The closer that Madeline gets to feeling better, the harder the game becomes. This game is almost telling us in a way that mental health struggles are not easy, but that the payoff is worth it. Then there are the specific elements of game design. One of the most meaningful gameplay elements is the use of the feather. The feather is such a good idea for an item because it's symbolic of how Madeline now has a weapon to use against her own mental health. Another gameplay element that is important is the dashing. For most of the game, Madeline doesn't have anything besides a dash and a hold button. But at the crucial moment when Gothline and Madeline bond, Madeline is granted a double dash. This symbolizes that Madeline feels like she is no longer alone, and through using both parts of her personality, she has gained strength. When she felt alone and scared, she was only able to dash once, but now she is able to successfully use a double dash. I think the most important takeaway from the gameplay is how every step is important. For example, without Madeline learning how to control her thoughts through breathing, she could have never confronted Gothline. Or if she never bonded with Gothline, she could have never scaled her own mountain. Madeline wouldn't have been able to overcome these trials on her own. And in a different world, without support, it's entirely possible for her character to be more akin to Mr. Oshiro's. I know that now is a trying time for a lot of people considering all that is happening in the world. But let's stay strong and rely on our loved ones so that we can fight our inner Gothalines together. Well, this concludes my analysis of Celeste. Thanks so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it. If you like my video, please give a like and thumbs up and share with your friends. Let me know down in the comment section your general thoughts and if there are any other media you'd like me to analyze. Thanks again. Have a good one.